Welcome back, my money makers. I am so glad to see you, and I have a special surprise for you. You are listening to the Do.Different.Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, founder and CEO of Social Impact Now and managing director of the Integrated Capital Fund. I have such a delightful treat for you. I have a good friend of mine, a very special guest, one of the smartest humans I know, Dr. Astrid Scholz. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Astrid Scholz is a polypreneur. Never heard that before. I'm super tickled about that. A polypreneur with a purpose. She's the co-founder of Armillaria, a tech for good company that creates digital infrastructure for more effectively and equitably mobilizing data, people, and capital towards addressing the most urgent challenges of our time. She is also the co-founder and game master at Game the System, a company that is creating serious games about stupid systems using the power of empathy to change real-world problems. Astrid is also known as the co-founder of Zebras Unite, a global movement for and by founders and investors who are building businesses that are better for the world. She was previously president of EcoTrust, a conservation-based development organization with more than 300 million, that's 2 zeros, in assets under management, where she first learned about using business as a force for good. Astrid, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And that's a bit of a mouthful of an introduction.
You are a big human, and that is why I adore you. But we're going to jump right in. And so for those listening today, we're going to be talking about a whole lot of things. So just strap in, because I think you're going to eventually see what the theme here is. Not that her bio was a giveaway, but Astrid is not only a disruptor, a igniter, a creative solution, future forward thinking human that is really out here changing the world. And so let's take it back to the beginning, Astrid. I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests, and that is, what is your first memory of money, and or when did you realize that money had influence?
Wow. That's such a good question. I have two very different answers, or two stories to tell, I guess. But when I first realized money in my life was when my father, who was not present in my life, made one of his rare visits. And on one of those rare visits, he gave me a gift of money that was made up of a bill, like each bill in what was then the German mark. You can tell from my accent, I grew up in Germany. And so I had never seen 1,000 mark bill, or many other bills for that matter. And unlike in the States, German money was very colorful. Every bill looks different. And so I was just enamored of this little sheaf of these bills. And it didn't last very long. It didn't stay in my possession very long, unfortunately, because my mother was a single mom raising me, and she's like, yeah, I'll be taking that. Thank you very much. Like, this absent dad was not being very helpful. But it was sort of this moment of like, oh, there are these, it made a really big impression, like to see 1,000 on one of these notes. And that's the biggest banknote you could get at the time in Germany. The power bit, other than that I was feeling disempowered because my mother took it away very quickly. I think that came at a later time. Sort of a fun fact about my biography. I was just talking about this with a friend last night. I managed to put myself through school, starting with a very posh boarding school in the south of Germany, all the way through my PhD on scholarships. And my journey with money and power began, I think, when in applying to that boarding school, again, single mom, there was no way she was going to be able to pay the tuition. No way in this world. And the admissions dean said something like, oh, well, Mrs. Scholz, if we want your daughter, the money will be found. And the money was found. I ended up with a like a Medici. I had my personal patron, a couple who paid for some of us scholarship students at this very posh boarding school, and that also made an impression, to have, wealth that you can just pay for the education of 5 or 6 of us.
Wow. And so at the time, do you feel like you kind of understood what that meant, or was it not until later where you're like, why would somebody do that? Or, any of those thoughts?
At the time it felt like, oh yeah, the money will be found. There's just, money is out there. Like, and somehow I had something in me that could potentially tap it, like this being wanted. That was a little weird. Like, if we want your daughter, money will be found. But later I then deserted this school. And those nice.
Well, I would expect nothing less. I was waiting. I'm like,
well, they were very upset with me.
Moment.
Yeah. So they were very upset with me, these nice people, because they would come and visit, once a year or twice a year, and I'd go out. They'd take all the scholarship students they were supporting out to dinner or whatever. And after my 3rd year, I applied to the international version of the same school, and then that's how I ended up in Canada. And they were irate. They understood this to be just a really bad break in etiquette, that I had turned my back on the German school. And boy, did they let me know it. And a good friend of mine at the school, who was also a scholarship student, she stayed tight with them. She finished at that school, and she was in their orbit for many years, and ended up having some role in their family office. Like, she played it right? Like, she got herself sort of insinuated into this rich couple's domain. And I was just like, I am out of here. I Germany, Schmermany, take me to Canada. But that idea, like that indignation, that, yes, because they have money, they have power, they have control over what I should or should not be doing. That's when it really sunk in at the tender age of 16.
Wow. And that a gift wasn't really a gift.
Yeah. Hello. Strings much, right?
What was presented as a gift never was really a gift.
It wasn't really a gift. No. Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. That's the first time I'm hearing that story. That's amazing. I love that. So now let's kind of move a little bit further in the timeline. You walked away from a successful career to become a tech entrepreneur in your 40s. Mm-hmm. What pushed you to make that leap, and what were the first systems you realized were broken?
Well, at the time, it's like 2012 or so. So what happened is, I was working at this very interesting organization. And as you know, when you're competent, no good deed goes unpunished. You end up being promoted, and in a nonprofit organization of a good size, like EcoTrust was, still is to this day, there's only so many places you can go. And so I found myself being promoted to executive VP and then president when the original founder undertook his first attempt at retiring. And by the time you're running a nonprofit organization, I mean, EcoTrust is one of those that has always done it right. They paid a competitive salary. I was making about as much money as I would have in the corporate world, like in the for-profit world. But you're also running, like by the time you're running an organization like that, all you're doing is fundraising and dealing with difficult HR issues. I was no longer doing any interesting projects. I'm sorry. Is that too much of a reduction?
Listen, I was like, I felt seen. That's all I got to say. Like,
right?
My spirit.
Or managing difficult board members. And also, it was a founder transition. And so that was challenging. And at the same time, and so I knew I had about a 50% chance of success, of actually taking it into the direction that I wanted to take. And in the meantime, the then very new cloud technologies were beginning to happen, right? It was like 2010, 2012. And I thought, geez, like what if we could actually use technology to accelerate the pace of social change? What would that look like? And we had been incubating a project that sort of contemplated the use of, kind of like a GitHub for, like where software developers go and deposit their code, and then other people can go in and take the code, make something new with it. And it was sort of that idea, like, what if we could do that with like social change innovations or environmental innovations, right? Like, what if we could actually have a gigantic repository of recipes that are working? Right. And now if you're looking for, like, for example, EcoTrust had developed an ecological forest management model that formed the basis of an investment fund, a forestry investment fund, predicated on ecological restoration and cultural restoration, right? Like the liquidity events in that fund are basically to sell land back to the Native American tribes to put them back into trust, right? Mm. So radical strategy, very successful. They're now on their third or fourth fund, over like 200,000 acres under management. Like, it's landscape scale change. Yeah. Say that fast a few times. So super innovative. Like, what if you could just pick up that model and say, oh, how can I adapt that to my region where I live? And that was sort of the insight behind what was initially called the Resilience Exchange, and what still fuels what is now the software company Armillaria. And so I just spun that out. Like, I just took that with me because I saw the potential. Like, I wasn't having much fun anymore as president in a founder transition. And at the same time, I saw the potential of technology to really accelerate the pace of change.
Right. That is so amazing. And I think that's kind of quasi how you and I kind of got connected, because I knew some of the people at EcoTrust. And so I know it's a long winding road. Okay. So now let's kind of go into how you've adopted that model. So you've talked about, you've built your life like a holding company. What have been the pros and the cons of this model, especially as a woman entrepreneur, navigating multiple ventures and possibly having ADHD?
We did talk about the ADHD, didn't we? Yeah, and maybe let me just take a pause, like, for your audience and say, just revisit that moment of, like, I'm going to quit this job and become an entrepreneur, like that moment of reinventing myself, because that caused a lot of consternation among my girlfriends. Like, a lot of my peers in the organization and other women, so similar age or a little bit older, a little bit younger, think, wow, isn't that incredibly risky? Like, you're walking away from a job with benefits, all the things that keep us, healthcare, right? Hello. All the things that keep us stuck. Yes. And I was feeling stuck. Like, I wasn't, like, I could have, I could have resigned from that job and then taken, like, the next logical thing you do is you go and run a bigger organization, right? Right. But then you're just in the same business model, the same nonprofit vibe of, you're selling ideas, you're getting funding, you're delivering outcomes, hopefully, that are useful in the world. But you're stuck in that same institutional structure. And for me, that became untenable because of, like, I didn't just want to work for a different flavor of that. But it took a leap of faith to say, yeah, actually, my ideas are good enough to get funded and make money that way as an entrepreneur, right? Foolish me thinking I could be a tech entrepreneur when, we all know you have to be a young white guy to be a tech entrepreneur.
Yeah, from the Bay Area.
From the Bay Area, preferably Stanford, I only went to Berkeley, wrong university. No, but in all seriousness, right? Like, that, it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. And that's not because my ideas were bad. I know they're not. I have been very successful at selling ideas. That is the nature of fundraising. But all of a sudden, I'm trying to sell my idea to VCs, venture capitalists. And what, you're telling me my ideas are no longer any good? The only thing that was different was the room I was in. And I know you've been in those rooms, right? Like, those people don't look like us. Right. and so that's what sort of led me down the path of, like, well, in order to build my tech business, I found myself having to build another business. The first one being what we're trying to do here in Oregon was build an investment fund that supports women entrepreneurs with non-VC capital.
Mm-hmm.
And then that ran into some interesting challenges, which in turn led to the creation of the Inclusive Capital Collective, where you and I reconnected, and the creation of Zebras Unite as a movement for entrepreneurs that are not VC funded and don't want to be VC funded. But that was I'm an accidental polypreneur, I would say. I thought I could just do one thing, but it turns out when you do systems change, you can never do just one thing.
No, because every time you get a layer, it's like Inception. Every time you get to another layer, you're like, oh, well, I can't go forward because this problem. Okay, so let me fix that problem. Then you're like, you go to another layer, and like, oh, I can't really fix this until I fix this. So you're like, okay, I'll go and build that thing.
Yes.
And it's the never-ending rabbit hole of just like continually solving these problems. And what I love is people will say to me, and I bet you get this too, of like, you're doing so many things, but what they don't understand is like they're all things in the same silo, right? So you actually are trying to build a thing to actually let you move the first thing that you actually wanted to build forward, but you can't possibly move that thing forward until these other things are built. But from the outside, because most people I don't think are systems thinkers, they can't necessarily see how the dots are all connected. So that's something that I've always appreciated about you.
Well, and it's tricky, right? Because the advice you get is, oh, you just have to lean into this one thing now and you have to crush it, right? It's the hustle culture and go. And I'm like, but if you do that in the tech space, especially, the thing that you are told as a woman, and it's only worse for women of color, is you just have to be more like the white dudes. Well, that's impossible.
Yeah.
And I literally, I was keynoting at a conference for women entrepreneurs in Reno, Nevada. Room full of women entrepreneurs. And this dude comes out from the business school. This professor comes out and he presents the room with this new empirical evidence that basically says, if you just stand like the men and project confidence like the men, and if you do this and that and the other to alter your appearance maybe like the men, then you will get funded. And as you know, I travel with an emergency clown nose. I pulled out my clown nose and heckled him and put him in his place, and the entire room just bust out laughing. I'm like, you cannot be serious. That the best, and your profession can tell us, is that the women, we just have to be more like the men to succeed at raising capital for our businesses.
Which then the men resent, right? So,
oh yeah, that too.
Right? They'll resent the women who are more male presenting because they're like, oh, are you trying to be a man?
You cannot win this, right? Like anybody who has seen the Barbie movie and has heard America Ferrera's, soliloquy, that you cannot win this.
You cannot win. Well, we're gonna wrap up this segment. We've been talking with Dr. Astrid Scholz from Armillaria and so many other things, the poly entrepreneur. But I can't wait to get into this more. We've been talking about her story, her journey, and in the next segment, we're actually now going to be moving into talking about money and finance as a field and what's happening in some of the work that she's doing. So make sure you come back. Follow and subscribe with us on YouTube as well as on Instagram on Do Better with Elaine. You're listening to the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and I will see you after the break. Welcome back, my money moguls in training. You're listening to the Do Different Better Show, and I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. We are now diving into segment 2 with Dr. Astrid Scholz, and it has been so exciting. If you missed out on segment 1, definitely want to go back and listen to it. But if you're just joining us, we are talking with Dr. Astrid Scholz of Armillaria, and now we're going to move into, we've talked about her money story, we've talked about her background, but now we're going to talk about we left off on talking about raising capital and how it's a very different journey for women raising capital for their funds or their projects versus men. So, you've talked about if you can't find the capital, build your own. What lessons have you learned about who gets to build and what kind of support is really needed to diverse fund managers to actually thrive?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I learned is I was not the only one who came up with this idea. Like the entrepreneurs out there, like you will be shocked to hear, lots of women and women of color and men of color and like basically anybody who's not, a cis white guy has a hard time raising capital for their company. Some number of us then hit on this idea like, oh, what if I created a fund? And the first one we tried to build was here in Oregon, a fund for women entrepreneurs, because the local foundations were telling us, well, we can't invest in your business, or we don't invest in businesses directly. But
Right.
if you have a fund, we can invest in the fund. We thought, well, that sounds great. Let's do that. And ran into some interesting challenges because Oregon has weird state securities laws that actually make it very, very difficult for new fund managers to set up a fund, especially if you're trying to use non-equity instruments. If you're using, it's one of just a handful of states where you are personally liable if something goes wrong.
Oh, wow.
You want to let that sink in. So it was very difficult to get lawyers to work with us, etc. We ended up outsourcing the diligence and the underwriting to a partner organization in Colorado. That's how we got around the local. But it was, and then the pandemic hit. But that idea, right? Like if you can't find capital, make your own. The moment we started building the Accelerate Fund, we ran into other people who were doing the same thing. And so in early 2019, I was at an event of the Serdna Foundation in LA, and we were just going through the slog of trying to build this fund. And one of the foundation's program officers said, well, what do you need? Like, what do you think would be helpful? I said, well, we know of at least 20 other fund managers. It'd be really exciting to bring them together and figure out the answer to your question. And so here's this lovely program officer who just threw some money at us to basically bring us all together in Denver, back before the pandemic, before it was cool, to talk about what do emerging fund managers need? Like what do, people who are from the historically oppressed communities that are using capital and business formation as a strategy for intergenerational wealth creation, right? Like what do we actually, what's needed, right? And so that's what spawned the idea for the Inclusive Capital Collective, which is a national network of mostly BIPOC fund managers who are using debt, equity, and or real estate instruments to do really innovative stuff in their communities, like everything from, buying strip malls and flipping them to local Black management and businesses, or using these really interesting revenue-based instruments to make investments in Indian country, for example. I mean, and it's just like, I think there's like 300 members now. I knew 20, but there's at least 300, and that's probably still the tip of the iceberg because, we're just making our own capital now.
Well, and that's what started the Integrated Capital Fund was the type of money that was needed. So what we were finding in Minnesota is there was a new impact fund did a research study to find out what was the largest gap of capital. And what we found was the largest gap of capital was really between 25 and 75,000. After 75,000, getting capital, while it wasn't easy, it was a heck of a lot easier. But what we also know is that's the most critical capital to help the business survive the valley of death, right? Which is that year 2 to year 5, right? You need that capital infusion. And even when we talk about like why you would need like a debt, because I tell my entrepreneurs, you cannot produce enough. Because as you produce more, your expenses go up. So you can never make up the gap to make the investment into the business in that piece of equipment or the human capital. You're going to have to take on either equity investment or you're going to have to take on debt. But all of that to say of like, I talked with one of the local CDFIs, community development financial institutions. And I said, well, what's the average check size? And they said to me about $75,000, and that, and they could let kind of like, you know, a little brief pause. And they said, well, and that's trending up because we're doing a lot more real estate deals. Yeah. So not only do we have this $25,000 to $75,000 gap, I'm now being told that the gap is going to be bigger because they're choosing to due diligence, because it costs them the same amount of money to do $100,000 project as it is to do $1 million project. So why not do the $1 million project? So now I said, oh, so now the gap is even widening. So now the one organization that was really centered on serving that capital gap where there already was a gap, now is leaving a larger gap. So I'm like, we've got to do something. And so very similar to you, I'm like, well, no one's doing this. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try. So we had to create our own fund, which is the Integrated Capital Fund. So I definitely hear you as far as like, we've got to create our own solutions. So let's move on to like, you said the more you learn, the more radicalized you become, especially around money. What is the one money lie or myth you wish more women or people of color would unlearn immediately?
I'm never very good, like when you put me on the spot like that. The one thing.
Or many things. It could. I know the list is long, so
the list is long. I think. Well, the biggest money myth that I find irritating is that you always have to build more wealth. I was talking to this friend who's a wealth advisor, and she's out of the San Francisco Bay Area, you know, and she's got a bunch of women who are her clients who all became suddenly very rich, either because they divorced a tech millionaire husband or they did their own thing or they're corporate lawyers. And, you know, she was talking about this one woman who has like 250 million in assets. And she still thinks she has to keep growing her wealth. Like, why? Like, what's enough? Like, when? When is it enough? You know, is it at 300 million? It's like, right. I mean, and this idea that just wealth has to keep growing, just the financial wealth has to keep growing. Like, what if you used your financial wealth to build community health and wealth? Right? What does that look like? And so I think unlearning that, right? Like that we just have to have more and more and more of the money wealth. Like, what if we create a portfolio that also creates the impact we want in the world, or the time we want with our children and our elders, right? Or what does that look like? Like, how do you know, like you can't eat money.
Right.
So that, and I realize, I mean, I don't come from wealth, but I also I don't seem to have that DNA in me to just want to get more and more and more. Right. I'm interested in the quality of the life that a certain amount of money affords you.
Right.
So that's, I think a lot of people, it's easy, I think, to get sort of trapped in the, I must be needing more. But do you?
Right. And to what end? Like, yeah. Right. And for what purpose? I think for me, one of the money myths for me is that charity always does good. Right.
Oh, hello. That's like a whole nother conversation. Now we're having a 3 martini conversation.
Yeah. Charity always does good. All charities are great charities. It's like,
no.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like the gift that wasn't really a gift, right? Like how many, I mean, literally, that's a whole nother show. I mean, there are so many strings attached to quote unquote philanthropy, right? And the hoops that you have to jump through when really all we want is general support funding for our ideas, right? Like that's why it's so challenging to do some of this work that is truly sort of systems change, right? Because if it's not already in some foundation's logic model, they don't even know how to give you money.
No, their heads crack. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I like to call it, I say like the nonprofit philanthropy industrial complex is really, akin to a strip club. All the nonprofits are dancers and we're all trying to like shake our butts And whoever like has the most sparkly, nipple covers is the one who's going to get the funding, right? The people, I mean, like that. I mean, that's how it feels.
Yeah.
As somebody who was a grant writer and continues to write grants, it's like, okay, or I've got to tell the poverty porn. I got to tell you like my which may not even be true, but that's the only way you're going to like listen and understand is if I tell you this downtrodden story, because if I tell you that I've actually had advantages, you don't actually believe that I actually still need help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, in part the insight with the Inclusive Capital Collective was to say, look, I mean, all these emerging fund managers, they already know what they need, right? Like we know that folks who are, trying to create community owned real estate in Black and brown neighborhoods, we know that they're facing, the effects of redlining and systemic injustice, which is why their loan to value ratios are upside down and they can't get commercial lenders.
Right.
This is not rocket science, right?
Right.
And so then we know what kind of philanthropic capital injection we could use in that capital stack, right? And that's the point of the Inclusive Capital Collective, to be, to do that education of the impact investment space, if you will, so that the individual operators don't have to do it, because that's part of what's so exhausting, right, for all of us.
So what
it's
do you
like
think?
Having to educate folks over and
over and over and over again. So what would be your advice to wealth holders for them to, because I think that's also part of the challenge as somebody who is doing a lot of that educating work, right? Oh. Once I get in the room, like they're so happy that I'm in the room and I'm giving them a different framing, but it's finding the rooms and getting in the rooms. So what do you think needs to be done, or what should wealth holders to be doing differently to engage, to seek out, to what should they be doing differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, just my prior call, somebody asked me, how do we get them to come out of the woodwork, because it's so private, it's so posh, it's so, secret, who has wealth and where the family offices are and whatnot. And I guess, I mean, if you are a wealth holder, right, there are obviously places, I mean, just go educate yourself, like go and actually, meet people in the communities that you're interested in or that you have a curiosity about. Don't just outsource it all to your advisors and your gatekeepers, who will give you these nice, like sanitized, versions of what's going on and where you can do your, make your risk adjusted investments and, have your cake and eat it too. That's the obvious answer. It's like go out and actually meet people. And the second thing is, and that's of course part of what we're doing with some of these initiatives I've been part of, is when you see like a bright beacon that resonates with you, go towards that light, right? So when we started talking about the Inclusive Capital Collective, all kinds of people took notice and said, oh, now that you have named it that, I get it. I understand that it's an association of innovative fund managers, right? Or with the Wealth Hackers Initiative, we're amping up the language, right? We're dialing it up a little bit to say it's a wealth defense industry. It needs subverting.
Well, hold that thought. We're going to get into that. So we're going to wrap up this segment because we're going to dive right into that piece of it, because I want to get to that. So we're wrapping up segment 2 of the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. I'm here with the esteemed Dr. Astrid Scholz, talking about what are the changes that we need to do in finance and money, not only from a wealth holder perspective, but also from organization, nonprofit, philanthropy, but also as businesses. And I'm so excited. So don't forget, if you're really enjoying this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, but come back and catch me in segment 3. I will see you after the break. Welcome back, y'all, to the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and I have my special guest, Dr. Astrid J, founder of Armillaria. And we were just talking about the wealth defense industry. So, Astrid, tell me about the wealth defense industry. What is it? How does it show up in our daily lives? And what does it mean to hack the system when it comes to wealth building?
Yeah, so the wealth defense industry is basically think of it as the lawyers, the accountants, the advisors that are helping rich people stay rich and get way richer. And you and I don't see them in our daily lives because we're not of interest to them. Like our measly, net wealth doesn't warrant advisors in pinstripe suits. But once you get into the millions and billion-dollar ranges, there are lots of people who will help you just keep making more of it. And it's problematic. There's about $100 trillion in private wealth that's owned by private families. And we're seeing a big wealth transfer beginning to unfurl with, the parent generation, the boomers, the older Gen Xers, moving that, transitioning that wealth handing it over to their children. And that next generation is really interesting because by and large, they don't share the values of their elders anymore, right? And so they're interested in doing different things with that wealth, maybe redistributing it, maybe putting it to better work for people and planet. And what we find is that there are structural impediments to doing that. And it's obscure things like when Rockefeller first set up the Rockefeller Foundation, like there's a trust that was created that allocates how that original wealth can be managed. And some of those organic documents from 100 or so years ago now act as handcuffs on what this next generation of wealth holders can potentially do. And so the Wealth Hacker Initiative is basically an international effort to figure out what tools do we need to give this next generation of wealth holders to break these shackles of their trust instruments, like break up the way the wealth was managed if they have different ideas about what to do with it.
I love that. And I sit on a board, a corporate board, but it's a family-owned company. And many of the people on the foundation board are family members. I'm one of, I think it's now 50% community members and 50% family members. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard the sentence said, well, the wealth generator, right? This is what they wanted. This is what they liked. And I've had to say several times, I said, listen, I want to be clear that I realize I don't have to see y'all at Thanksgiving. Like, I don't have to see you at Christmas. I don't have to see you at the high holidays. I said, however, I have to imagine that if the wealth creators wanted us to follow very strict guidelines, they would have left this money in the company and had the company drive where this money went. The fact that they decided to create a whole different organization, and now we have people who are not in the family helping to make decisions about this money, that they wanted to do something different. They did not want they wanted us to respond to the times, because the reality of when they started this and the reality of now is two completely different universes. And I've had to say that several times over my tenure on this board to remind people of they would have held this in a different way if they wanted decisions to be so so tightly wound. And the fact that we are our own 501c3 with our own bylaws and our own structure leads me to believe that they wanted to empower people to do what needed to be done to respond to the times that we're living in, not the times when this money was generated, right?
You would think so. And yet, right, like that fiduciary duty gets wielded like a hammer, right? Like it's
like a weapon, like a
total weapon, yeah. And that's why we're calling it the wealth defense industry, right? Like so it needs subverting, right? And that's same like it's. So I find myself getting more and more radicalized around it, right? Like the Wealth Hackers is sort of one expression of that as a game company, because I was so frustrated, like I mentioned the one meeting of the Sorda Foundation in 2019. 5 years later, I'm in LA again, different family foundation, And the moment we started talking about more innovative things the foundation could do with its impact investing or its entire corpus, all the defenses went back up, right? And I overheard one of the trustees say to his daughter, oh, but we have to make, how's it go? Well, we invested in the market because if we make more money, we can make more grants. And just the cognitive dissonance of that. Do you know how your money is making money in the market? It's creating the problems you're trying to solve. That's a problem.
Like literally, there's a direct link to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And I know I may have shared this story with you, or I may have shared this with the audience. I remember I was at, I think I was at the Innovation Summit in Salt Lake City and Winter Innovation Summit, and we had just come out of a meeting, and I was talking with a chief investment officer of a very large foundation. And we were talking, the conversation was about perpetuity. And as we were leaving this session, and I said to this person who's a friend of mine, I said, so what's the conversation with your board and perpetuity? And her response was, there's no way I can even get into that conversation. I said, okay, fair enough. And we just kept talking, kept walking. And then she said, well, and there's always going to be social problems. And it was at that moment I was like, the diametrically opposed worldview that we did not share.
Right.
And I said, yeah, but what could it look like if every foundation closed? And could we actually use that money to solve the real root issue that then makes philanthropy obsolete?
Yeah.
Yes, there will be social needs, but what could it look like if we leveraged all that money to deal with the most base root cause of our social problems? Is there a universe where this could be mitigated? And she threw her head back and she's like, I've never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, people just get very comfortable in these jobs, and as anybody can do, this is actually a fun exercise for anybody who's listening. Take any foundation or any nonprofit for that matter that put their name in your search engine and add 990 behind it. And that what that gives you is the 990 tax return. And you can entertain yourself by looking at just how much these chief investment officers are paid in these foundations. It's a very comfortable lifestyle. Why would you question it? Right?
Well, even a program officer, and this goes back to my stripper club analogy, right? The strippers get hardly paid anything, right? Yeah. The owners make all of the money, right? And when we think about program officers, the people doing the work, which is a nonprofit, are paid at 1/3 of the rate of a program officer. And the program officer doesn't do work. Yeah. They're not in the community. They're not hearing wiping the tears from community's eyes. They're not seeing people, aged people, starving in their homes or living in dilapidated homes, being priced out of the market, small businesses, main streets closing in rural communities. But you get paid more and you're the furthest away from the problem, and you don't have a responsibility to learn about the problem. You make that responsibility for the nonprofit to teach you about the problem, which they don't get compensated for.
Yeah. My favorite are the foundations that tell you they don't want to give you any money for your overhead costs. I mean, I've turned people away. I've said to foundations, that's insane, and we will not take your money. Or the foundations who only want you to hire brand new staff. God forbid you want to pay for any existing staff. It's the ADC, again, it's that's a whole nother.
Right. That's all. Or 401ks, right? I can't tell you, I can't put in my grant that I want to have money to be able to provide a 401k for my people.
Yeah.
But if you look at their grant guide, their granting priorities, wealth equity, right? Having a 401k is a part of wealth equity, but you won't give me a grant unless I lie on the grant. The big lie that nonprofit and the relationship between nonprofit, right? It's kind of, and then I'm like, the philanthropy or all the Johns that come in. It's like, when I start dancing for you, you actually think I could be your girlfriend, right?
Yeah, right. Wow, I now cannot unsee that.
But it's mind-boggling, and to your point of like, you can literally, the cognitive dissonance that exists, like you could literally be having this conversation with somebody and say, it is in your priorities of like wealth equity, or you want to bring people out of poverty, like all these things, and you're like, so can I write you a grant so that I can like buy health insurance for my people and 401, and I can start, because it's 12. I mean, for our organization, it's going to be $12,000 to $15,000 just an administrative cost for us to be able to set up a 401k for our people.
Yeah, it's it's the sort of expectation that somehow that cost is covered by I don't know whom, like we all volunteer or something. But it's I think even more egregious on the way they manage the endowment side, right? Like the grant making is egregious,
right?
But it really is mind-boggling to me on the endowment side, right? I'll run through this math because it's just so revealing. I'll just name names. The Kaufman Foundation is one of the big foundations fostering inclusive entrepreneurship in America. And they had all these wonderful programs, with the Kaufman Fellows, and they were getting into catalytic capital. They were actually making investments into emerging fund managers, into the GP, into the management company.
Right.
And then I went right before the pandemic, went to one of their big conferences in Kansas City, and I was talking to their chief investment officer, and you know what she told me? Like her rules for investing that she's constrained by is like she cannot write a check that is smaller than 1% of her endowment. And I see if I can do the math right. Like I think it was a $2.5 billion endowment. So the smallest check she can write is a $25 million. $25 million. $25 million check is the smallest check she can write. And there's another rule created by whatever organic documents back when the foundation was set up. She cannot be any more than 10% in any one fund they invest in. You do the math. The smallest fund she can invest in is $250 million. How many funds created by women or people of color do you know that can take in that kind of check?
No.
I know 3, maybe out of the 300, right? Because that whole it's just so slow, and so that's where I find myself getting more radicalized around like, oh my God, because it takes decades. Like my friend Bettina, who runs the EcoTrust Forest Management company that spun out, she is now on her 3rd or 4th fund. That's finally a $200 million fund. It took her 15 years to get there.
Right.
That can't be the answer, that we wait for all the members in the Inclusive Capital Collective to finally be big enough that the Kaufman Foundation can write them the investment check that they can write. And that's hence, my now engagement with the Wealth Hacker Initiative. Like we have to break some of these organic documents like that set these rules and figure out how people can do that.
Well, this has been amazing. In 60 seconds, can you tell us just a little bit more about Armillaria as we kind of wrap up this last segment of the show?
Yeah, Armillaria, where it all started. So for all of this to be true, for wealth to move more quickly to the people and places that know what to do with it best, we actually need a different digital backbone. We need different digital infrastructure that moves people and innovation and capital. And that's what we're building at Armillaria, because you'll be shocked to hear AI isn't going to do this for us and Silicon Valley tech isn't going to do this for us. So here we are, building it ourselves.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for bringing on the show, Astrid. I think we need to have you back because there were so many other things we didn't get to unpack that I think our listeners would absolutely love for us to go to rabbit holes. We've talked about stripper clubs. We've talked about $250 million, funds. We've covered the gamut. But thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciated having you.
This was great. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Elaine.
Awesome. And thank you to my audience. We're now wrapping up the last segment of this show with Dr. Astrid Scholz of Armillaria. Thank you so much. We will see you next time. And don't forget to do different better.